And I call the honourable member for Hunter.
And I thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. There is nothing inherently wrong, of course, in principle with the bill before the House and those that have preceded it in the government's declaration of the so-called repeal days. And I suppose it does give this House something to do, because it doesn't seem to have much else to do under the tutelage of this government. Certainly the Federation Chamber isn't operating because it's got nothing to do. We seem to spend all of our time in this place these days dealing with bills that are pretty mundane, like this one, and condolence motions, for example, which are very important but are usually sent to the Federation Chamber after the first half dozen speakers or so, but of course have been kept here because this government has no legislative program. No legislative program. It's just extraordinary. You wonder what the Australian people are thinking. We're all down here. They're paying for our flights and subsidising our accommodation and paying for the cost of running this building, yet the House has got nothing to do, Mr Deputy Speaker. So I suppose this repeal bill does give the House something to do. But the other question is, what does removing most of these redundant bills mean for business? I ask that question because the government keeps saying this is about the reduction of red tape or regulation. Well, I ask myself whether it costs the government more in administrative terms to remove the bills than it does to leave them there. But I certainly don't see how business benefits from the repeal of most of the measures contained within the bill we're debating today. You know, for example, how does the repeal of the World International Privatisation Act of 1999, which privatised one entity to create a new private entity which itself no longer exists? There could be no better example of to demonstrate that that doesn't help business, Mr Deputy Speaker. That makes no difference to business, and that is true of just about every provision in this Act before us today. So the real crime here, Mr Deputy Speaker, is this spin and this attempt to perpetuate this myth that somehow these repeal days are benefiting Australian businesses. So, of course, we're not opposing the repeal of these redundant statutes on the statute books, but I challenge the government to outline exactly how businesses are benefiting. The other crime of the government is that, of course, they suggest that these bills do no harm, that they're all good news for the parliament, for the administration of government and for business. But that's not really true, Mr Deputy Speaker, because many of the measures in this bill give effect to or highlight the failure of the government to keep election promises, and indeed the promise to be a government of, in inverted commas, no surprises. For example, some of the provisions take us to drought measures. It's very nice to have the Minister for Agriculture at the table. His attempt, the Minister's attempt, to move the APVMA out of Canberra to his own electorate, which is always an interesting proposition, notwithstanding the fact that the professionals within the APVMA do not want to move out of Canberra, will not move out of Canberra, I'm reliably advised. And of course, those who have need to consult with and visit the APVMA are not people on the land or farmers or anyone pursuing those interests. It's the big multinational companies, typically, that market chemicals in this country. So, you know, they like to come to Canberra, Mr Deputy Speaker. When if I'm dealing with a representation from a farm group or a chemicals company, I like to get the APVMA up onto the hill in this place to brief me so I can better understand. And I appreciate the Minister's always willing to provide me with that briefing, as I would if I were the Minister for him. Now, it's going to be a long way from Armidale, Mr Deputy Speaker, when I want a briefing, or indeed the Minister needs a briefing, although he can go home and get his briefing, of course. of course, but this is an extraordinary position for the chemical companies to have to go to Armidale in the minister's electorate when they need to consult and meet with the regulatory body, which is so important to them. Now, the minister's interjecting. He's saying it's not very far. Well, I know this part of the world very well, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I can tell you, no matter how you get there, it's going to take you at least a few hours to get to Armidale. From Canberra, from Sydney, or from Melbourne, if your company is based in that capital city. But the greater point, in addition to the minister giving himself a big leg up with his electorate by claiming all these jobs are now coming to Armidale, is that the jobs aren't going to come because the people aren't going to move. These highly trained and skilled professionals live in Canberra, have kids in school in Canberra, are more than capable of securing another job, and they're not going to go, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is one of the most important regulatory bodies in this city, and it's going to fall apart. And the same can be said for our research and development corporations, which the minister is also insisting leave Canberra. Now, these are bodies that collect money and make decisions about where research money should be spent, and farm the money out, contract the money out, contract that job out to another body. It might be a university, for example. Well, this idea that they have to be out there in rural areas somewhere, it just contains no logic whatsoever. And the minister's proposition that they need to be close to a university is even worse, because what we want is contestability. We want those RDCs to have a few choices about who they farm that work out to, so that you have contestability and they get value for the money. But this minister wants to be parked in UNE, for example, so all the work's done at UNE. It's not a very bright idea, Mr Deputy Speaker, not a very bright idea at all. But of course, great for the minister, great for the minister, all in his own electorate, all in his own electorate. He's also moved his ministerial office, by the way, from Sydney to Armidale. That gives him 2 electorate offices, one in Tamworth, one in Armidale. Bingo, cha-ching, fantastic. You've got to give him points for initiative politically. He's doing okay. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, drought measures. Drought measures. This government's drought policy has been a complete failure. Drought continues to wreak havoc in parts of New South Wales and Queensland, in fact right across the nation, yet this minister gives them nothing but spin, nothing but false hope, a policy that is having no effect for any of them. They either can't access it or it's no good to them whatsoever, as the minister exits the chamber in disgrace and out of embarrassment. I'd be embarrassed too, Minister, if I were you. You are slowly creeping towards being the worst agriculture minister in this country's history. You're in this country's history. Now, you have a think about it. You have a think about it, Mr Deputy Speaker. The minister stands at this dispatch box on a daily basis claiming credit for all manner of things. It was something that happened 20 years ago, I remember he was claiming credit for this week in the parliament. But what has he done? The big initiative was this white paper, another broken promise because it became so late, completely lacking any narrative or strategic direction, no goals or objectives, just a cobbled together hodgepodge of ideas with a bit of money here, a bit of money there, which of course is a matter for other portfolio responsibilities. He claims the free trade agreements. Well, it's not his work, it's his, if anyone's, it's the Trade Minister's work, but a culmination of the former Labor government's work. But it's got nothing to do with the Minister for Agriculture. What has he done? What has he done but attempt to deliver all these riches to his electorate by moving these RDCs and the APVMA to his electorate? What has he done? What has this minister done? I honestly can't think of any initiative. He claims credit for commodity prices. He never mentions the commodities that are going down in price, only those going up. And the great tragedy of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that he likes most often to talk about cattle prices. Now, we're all happy. The cattle producers are getting a better price. That's a good thing.
But he can't take any credit for it, Mr Deputy
Order,
Speaker.
order.
What did he do,
Order.
Mr Deputy Speaker, to increase cattle prices?
Order. I would remind the member that this debate is on the Omnibus Repeal Day Spring 2015 bill, and I'm struggling to find a connection between the issues that the member is raising and the issues in the bill. The member has the call, and I'd ask him to be relevant to the bill.
And I won't do it because I want to save you time, but I can promise you that everything I've made reference to is contained in this bill. Drought is the most perfect example because it's repealing a provision on drought. They're all there, Mr Deputy Speaker, trust me. But I will.
Great faith in the member for Hunter.
Out of deference and respect for you, return to something very, very specific, and that is the abolition of the National Rural Advisory Council. It's in here, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, the National Rural Advisory Council is a statutory body, and on that basis has all those things associated by which you associate with statutory bodies, tenure for its members, an annual report, plenty of transparency and accountability, and chaired by none other than Mick Keogh, a highly regarded farm professional, agricultural professional in this country. Now it's gone, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't recall the minister promising that pre-election. It has been replaced, I concede, and it's been replaced by something the minister promised he'd do before the election. So I just qualify something I said earlier. He has done something. He got rid of one body, he's put another body in. So big achievement by the minister. The problem is the new group, the new body, the Agriculture Industry Advisory Council, is not a statutory authority. There is no annual report. There is no tenure for its members. They're there at the minister's whim, handpicked by the minister, and there at his pleasure, and has no transparency. So we asked at Senate Estimates recently, what this body does, but the officials didn't really seem to know very much. They can't. I challenged the minister to come back into the House and tell me which things he has done. It's going to be pretty hard because he hasn't done much, off the advice of this advisory council, because he said that's what it was going to do. They were going to consult around the country and they were going to advise the minister, and as a result he was going to come up with these new ingenious ideas for the agriculture sector. But there's another interesting thing about the advisory council, and again, this new body has some very good people on it, many of whom I know personally, very, very good people. But we need to know, given the expenses involved, what the advisory council does or is doing. And, for example, this is very important because, in August of 2014 they had dinner in Darwin to do some consultations, apparently, $3,042. October 14, Sydney. Oh no, sorry, that's not the one. Devonport, Tasmania, in April 15, dinner and networking, $3,916. Now these may be legitimate expenses, Mr Deputy Speaker. I wasn't there. I don't know how many people were there, but they're pretty pricey dinners. And if the taxpayer is going to be investing that sort of money in an advisory group completely chosen by the minister, made up of members who only serve at the pleasure of the minister, and you know what that implies, Mr Deputy Speaker. It means don't come to me with ideas I don't like, or you might not be on the advisory panel much longer, and I don't think there's anyone in this House would deny that the minister's capable of that, having gone through 2 secretaries, by the way, departmental heads, during his tenure. No one's going to doubt that the minister wouldn't hesitate to act if he was getting advice he doesn't like. But more particularly, if we're going to invest this sort of money in an advisory council, the taxpayers are entitled to know what it's doing, what advice it's giving, what are the basis of these expenses, so on and so on. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, this repeal bill does serve to highlight many of the failings and broken promises of this government. It's a government that's done nothing in agriculture except to claim credit for things it has had no responsibility for and can therefore claim no credit for.